Hi, I'm Temmie, and I am here to talk about a friend I once had and what happened with them. When I was growing up, I didn't really have a lot of friends. I was pretty awkward, and I got bullied a lot in middle and high school. So I really only started making like what I considered good lifelong friends once I was in college and when I was an adult. And so first year out at community college, I started meeting a really cool group of friends. They were into gaming. We played D&D and video games, and we'd, just hang out. I made friends with this one girl who I'm going to call Claire. Well, the way I got to know her, it's kind of funny, but she started dating my ex-boyfriend, and I'd heard about her before I met her. So I was a little jealous because I was still getting over him. But once I met her, I got it. Like, she was pretty cool. She was a nerdy girl like me. We both loved watching anime, and we did art together. We were both going to the same community college, so we were in classes together. We would help with studying, with notes, and just hang out during class. Like, she was my best friend. We were friends for a few years. She lived in the apartment that was kind of the communal hangout space for our group. She and another couple were staying there together. So we would be over there a lot, and I'd call her a lot just to chat. I know at one point, our group of friends were kind of jokingly calling me her girlfriend, which, it wasn't really like that. We just hung out a lot, but that's the kind of friendship we had. So a few years into it, and I'm dating my current boyfriend, who I'm now married to. His internet handle is Tech, so we'll just call him Tech. Things were starting to change. A lot of our friends were starting to move out of town to go their own way, or go to school elsewhere, or we had a lot of friends that joined the military. And so things were kind of changing. And I know my friend Claire, was nervous because she wasn't really sure where she was going to land. Her roommates were leaving as well, and she didn't really have a place to go. So she was kind of scrambling because her option, it seemed, would be to have to move in with her parents, who lived like an hour out of town. That would basically rip her out of her current life. She wouldn't be able to keep her job. She wouldn't be able to keep going to classes as easily. So she was under a lot of stress. And Tech and I were living together at that time. It wasn't very spacious accommodations, but we were considering like how we could help her, like maybe give her a place to stay for a while with us. And she did end up staying with some other friends. But yeah, so I have to start introducing other people in this. I'm using pseudonyms for everyone, but in order to understand the situation, I think I need to introduce a few other people. So one of the people in our group was a girl I'm going to call Tanya, and she was a bit younger than us. Like, we were all in our early 20s, right? And she was a teenager. She was young. She was dating this guy, Daniel, and she was kind of in need of help, I think, because she was very high energy. She would say things and you would never know if it was true. It seemed like her mind was kind of going a mile a minute, and she was in a lot of ways kind of immature, but in other ways she seemed to have gone through a lot. So, she talked about like going through abuse when she was younger. She talked about being a foster child. So she was dating this guy, Daniel. They were part of our group. They hung out. He was roommates with another friend in the group. And, for a while, they seemed all right. They were, they seemed very passionate about each other, but weird stuff started to happen. Like, one time, both Tanya and Daniel came to the apartment, and they were like looking for a place to hide, basically. And then a few minutes later, they left, I think, because the people in the apartment were like, no, you can't stay here. And a few minutes later, the police came, and I'm not really sure what that was about. I think her parents were trying to find her, and they were running away for whatever reason. So it was just this very weird relationship. They were kind of like hot, cold. Like, they'd break up, they'd be back together. I think she said at one point that she got pregnant with him, and then he didn't want it, and so she had an abortion. It was pretty traumatic for her. So this girl went through a lot, and my friend Claire kind of took her under her wing. She was the protective sort, and this was like a year, I want to say like a year before the events that I'm going to describe. But Tanya moved away. She left, and when that happened, I was like, good. I'm really glad she got out of that relationship. She moved to another state. It seemed like she was, going to get some distance between her and this ugly situation, because it did seem like it could have been abusive. A year later, they came back. I don't know why, but Tanya was back in town. It was very weird. Like all of a sudden she's just back and we're like, oh, okay. And she's dating a new guy. Like, cool. Well, good. I'm glad. You seem really happy. I don't know why you're back. I thought that you want to get away from all this. And so she and my friend Claire were hanging out a lot. And we didn't really think too much of it because it's just, people hanging out. So I'm going to try and remember the events leading up to it. But this is all around the same time that my friend Claire was getting kind of stressed out about her living situation and wanting to, figure out where she was going to land because she really didn't want to live with her parents. That's happening. Tanya's back in town, whatever. And then the night that this stuff happened, we get a call from a mutual friend who's like distraught. They're crying. They're just saying, oh my God, Claire killed someone. And when you hear something like that, your mind goes to the most reasonable place. So what I thought was, oh my God, poor Claire, she must have gotten a car accident and someone got killed. Like that's where my mind was. I was not thinking it could have been anything else. And so our apartment, some of our friends started coming over and we were looking at the news. We were just, rechecking the internet to see if there was anything going on. And we realized, oh no, this was not a vehicular incident. This was something much, much worse. As soon as we realized that this had to do with an actual premeditated murder, we started seeing some of the faces in the mugshots, our friend Claire, and then also Tanya. We realized, we started guessing, I think that the person who was killed was probably Daniel. If it was that, and it was, they killed Danny. And there were a number of other people that were also arrested. And we were trying to figure out, like, who are these other people? Because all told, there were 6 people that were apprehended. The 2 girls I mentioned, Tanya's current boyfriend, he was part of it too. He apparently was there because he was feeling protective of Tanya. And then there were 3 other people and we're like, who the hell are these people? So one of them we realized was this guy that I'm going to call Oren. We knew him. He was not part of our group, but he was someone who Claire had been associated with for as long as I knew her. I think he was either a past boyfriend or he was someone that Claire knew who he had a crush on her, but it wasn't reciprocated. Either way, they weren't a thing, but he definitely had like feelings for her. And he was kind of creepy. We always got the sense that like he was no good. He had violent interests and he kind of considered himself a bounty hunter. He did not live in the area. I should mention that. He lived about like a 7 or 8 hour drive from where we lived. So there was that. So he considered himself a bounty hunter. And she mentioned that one time he had gotten injured like while pursuing someone. And he called her. He called her and was like, oh, I've been stabbed or something. And she was freaking out like, why are you calling me? You need to call the police. So yeah, he was just a really weird guy. He was bad news. We told her over and over, like, you need to not associate with this person because, we're worried about him. And I think she felt a kind of responsibility to, be in contact with him because she was worried about him or something. Like she was just the kind of person who didn't want to like hurt people's feelings or something. Or, I don't know. At one time on Claire's birthday, we all went out as a group. We went out, got dinner at like this Mexican food place where they had you wear the silly hat and they sang songs if it was your birthday. So we got to embarrass her with that. Yeah. After that, it was evening and we wanted to walk around. And so we went to this local pedestrian bridge to hang out and like, we're all hanging out, having a good time. And the guy, Oren, who I mentioned, he showed up. He drove 8 hours from where he lived to come to see her on her birthday. She did not ask him to do this. I think he thought it was like romantic. And it was very weird. It was like, what the hell are you doing here? But we put up with him being around because it was her friend and it was her birthday. So yeah. So weird guy, bounty hunter, whatever. So he was involved with it and 2 of his buddies were there too. So we're just trying to figure out what's going on. More of our friends are showing up and it was a really rough night because some of them were really close friends with Danny. And when they heard he had been killed, they were just, devastated. His roommate was a friend of ours. I'm going to call him Sonny. He was actually away in the military and he had come back coincidentally because his grandfather had died. So he was here for a memorial service and then his friend gets killed. So it was just, he was devastated. And he came to our apartment and he was just, he's normally this like, happy-go-lucky, just sweet guy. He was just like quiet and his eyes, were red and he was just in tears. And at one point he was so upset he like punched the wall. And I don't blame him. I don't know how I'd react if something like that happened to someone close to me. So I was the one kind of keeping everything together. I was calling people. We were checking the news. It kind of brought out, an interesting reaction in me where I just was in like help everyone mode. I wanted to see that everyone was taken care of and that we found out what we could. And it was only when my parents came to the apartment to check up on us that I kind of I was able to break down, because it was kind of like, okay, the adults are in the room. So that all happened. We had no idea what the situation was, but I can go back and explain it, because afterwards we were able to piece together what happened. So Tanya came back to town to do this. She and her boyfriend, they wanted to get back at him because she had, in her words, been assaulted. And I don't know why they didn't ask for help from the police. I can understand that, like, police aren't always helpful in those situations. And I think what happened was they were having a discussion about their frustration. And my friend Claire at that time said, I know a guy. And so she's the one who connected them to Oren, because they basically came up with a plan to do a hit. At first, they were going to charge them, I think, for the hit, but then he agreed to do it as a favor for Claire. So they came up on the way up to where we were to do the deed. They stopped at a pool supply store and bought like acids, because their plan was, once they had him, they were going to take him down the highway and find an empty field in the middle of nowhere and bury him and then pour acid over the grave. This was more than just coming to, beat him up. They planned to end this guy. So yes, they came to town. And I will say, like, in the days before this happened, my friends were acting very strange. Tech and I, we were going to run a game for them. Like, he's a dungeon master, and he was really excited to, have more people around to play games with. Because as I mentioned, a lot of our friends have kind of gone their own ways. And I think he wanted to run a game for me and some friends, because it's kind of nice to have, more girls in the group. So he was going to run a Vampire the Masquerade game. And he was really excited about that. But when we were talking about it and planning it, they kind of seemed distracted. Like, they kept, just kind of looking around like, yeah. And literally, like, the night before it happened, I was hanging out with Claire, and I think Tanya was there too. And it was late, and it was actually my mom's birthday. And like, we wanted to do something nice. So we went to the Marie Callender's in town and picked up a pie and brought it to my parents, even though it was kind of later. It was like 9 or 10 or something. I just remember how weird it is to think that, like, they were hanging out with my family and at my parents, like, literally the night before they went off to murder someone. So that happened, and it really just tore our group apart, because no one wanted to talk about it. People were just so hurt by this happening that everyone just kind of kept to themselves. And I felt very alone, because, that was my best friend that was just plucked out of my life. And I didn't really have any other people close to me other than Tech to talk to about what we were going through. Everyone was angry and hurt in their own way. One of them, Sunny, I mentioned, was the one who had been roommates with Daniel. He was just furious. He just basically wrote those girls out of his life. I think at one point Tech had mentioned to Sunny, hey, didn't you, like, literally months before this happened, he was in the military, he had been in town and he was hanging out, and we got a picture with him, and on each side is just Claire and Tanya, and they're all just, smiling, and he had that picture on his phone. And so Tech mentioned, didn't you have a picture like that? And Sunny just was like, you're right. And he went straight to his phone and immediately deleted it, because he didn't want it. One of our other friends, Lance, he had a very different reaction. He was kind of in love with our friend Claire. He had a longtime crush on her. And so when this happened, he felt that Claire hadn't done anything wrong, and that Tanya was the one who had led her down this path to this, terrible choice. And so he wanted us to stick up for Claire, and so like, Claire's family had been getting a private detective to try and get whatever information they could to defend her. And Lance wanted us to talk to the private detective to try and help build a case to defend Claire, but we didn't know what happened. It didn't seem right to get involved, and we had our own plans. We were going to be moving out of town soon ourselves, so we were horrified at the thought that we almost got involved in this. We did not get involved. My grandfather is actually a lawyer. I talked to him about, like, what we should do, what Claire should do. And he was basically telling us, don't get involved. He was saying that it doesn't help their case that this was through a group of D&D gamers, like, that it's not going to help build sympathy with a jury, which sucks in my opinion, because I don't think it had anything to do with their interests. It could have happened in any group. But yes, so I didn't go, but he went to the hearing for the preliminaries, not like the official trial, but he did go to see Claire and I think some of the others, maybe it was just her, to get their hearing and be informed of the charges against him. He said that she was just at the stand and kind of looking down the whole time. He felt that to him indicated her guilt. I think that she was probably just coached to not speak because it wouldn't help anything. Okay, I need to go back and explain more about what happened that evening because we found out more. I found out more by reading the court cases after the fact, but basically they arrived on the scene. So, these guys are kind of waiting on hand. Tanya had owed money to Daniel. And so she said that she would meet him at this specific place to pay it back. And so she lured him over there, basically. He came with a friend who waited in the car, and the friend was like really sketched out about this. He was like, I don't know, man, you shouldn't go there. I'm worried. But he went in and they got jumped. So they stabbed him. They stabbed Danny. Then they wrapped him up in a tarp. And so when he died, he was suffocated. And they were trying to get off the scene to finish the rest of their plan, but they didn't know the area. They immediately drove the wrong way and ended up in a ditch. And some of Danny's friends were there too. And they chased these guys down and started fighting with them. My friend's involvement was that she and one other guy were at the scene. They were kind of like the lookouts. So they were part of it. They knew what was going to happen. They were part of what made it possible. It was just a very weird, situation to be in because I still care about her a lot. I still did and I still do. But I knew I couldn't get involved because it wasn't just me at this point who could make that decision. If I chose to stay in contact with someone like that, then I feel that it was going to be putting my relationships at risk too, because I just don't know. I don't know what kind of influence that would have brought into my life. So I made the decision to not associate with her anymore. I did send her a letter expressing my frustrations, but also telling her that I was no longer going to be in contact and that I was moving away. A few years later, we got word that Tanya in jail, she had hung herself. I need to look it up, but I think she was only 20 when she died. It was so awful because it was everything about this was pointless. They went into this with the idea that they were helping protect her, even though that I agree was misguided. She didn't have to get back into that situation at all. She was away and she ends up dying anyway. Yeah, some of the ugliness that came out of that was, we heard about it pretty soon after, but one of our friends, the guy who liked Claire, Lance, he calls us and he's giddy. He's like, hey, did you hear the good news? And we were like, it better not be about Tanya fucking dying. And he was just like, oh, I super don't agree with that kind of, mirth about the suffering or death of others, even if you're mad at them. It really sickened me. A few years after that, so I want to say maybe about 7 years or so, I realized that Claire had been released. She wasn't convicted of actual murder. I think because she was cooperative, she got off on manslaughter. And, I'm sure she had good behavior too. So she got out with, I want to say about 7 years. I realized this because I started seeing an account that was a pseudonym, but it had this very fantasy kind of name and avatar. And it was very reminiscent of the kind of stuff that she used to post. So I reached out to a mutual friend and he confirmed that, yes, she's out. So that was just, kind of a shock. Oh, wow. She's out. I meant to mention that shortly, after the murder, before we had left town, this goes back to different people's reactions. But one of the things that was weird was where she used to work was a place that I would go by a lot. And so I was there and her coworkers were talking about her and I was, yeah, it's really tough. And they said, well, tell her that we're rooting for her, they were supportive. And I was just like, what do you mean? What, rooting for what? She did this. But more recently, just in the last half year, I was going about town. I went into this one place of business. I won't specify, but I was finishing up my shopping and I did my transaction and I noticed that not the cashier who was helping me, but another woman who was behind the desk looked really familiar. And I was just in shock. So when she left, I asked the cashier, hey, is that her? Is that Claire? And she's like, oh yeah, that's Claire. And I just, kind of muttered something about, oh, that's someone I used to know. And I left. So I did see her recently, and I had thought about this a lot. I had thought about if I ever saw her in person, what I would say. I used to think that I would go up to her and just shout at her and say, do you know what you did to us? Do you know what you did to our group? And just, ask her what she was thinking. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Like, was it worth it to kill Danny and just ruin all our friendships like that? But now that it's been so long, I'm just glad that that's all behind me. It was like a whole lifetime ago, and I'm doing okay. To be honest, I'm glad to see that she's actually seems to be doing okay. And, some of the things that I personally have gotten out of this situation, I've done a lot of reflecting. I've kind of had to, since not a lot of people really want to talk about this. As I mentioned, all of our friends had their own different reactions to it, and I'm sure they all processed it in their own way. I haven't really talked a lot about it with them. Many of them we're still friends with. It's kind of this part in our history that we just don't want to talk about. But as for me, I've had to learn a few things about, my standards for friendships. I think it's important to be aware of more than just the kind of friends that you make, but also the friends that your friends choose to associate with. If they have people in their sphere that are concerning, I think that's worth taking into account, because you don't know what those people could bring into your life through your mutual friend. And so I've become more vigilant because of that. And with Claire, I think a lot about what happened with her and Oren. And I think that maybe I should have tried harder to convince her to stop talking to him. Or maybe I should have recognized the danger that he brought and just started dissociating myself more from her and everything to do with her when she was refusing to cut ties with him. I don't know. But I personally feel a responsibility when I'm garnering my own friendships, that if I have a friend that I think could be a danger or a problem to someone else, that I have a responsibility to my other friends to not expose them to that. So I don't know. Maybe it's hypervigilance, but I just think that's important. Anyway, so I'm kind of bouncing back to other people's reactions, but basically one of the reasons it was so hard for me to talk about this, like in my own friend group, they didn't want to talk about it. And then amongst people who weren't there, I think they just didn't get it. Like other friends or my family, they didn't know my friend. And so when I explained what happened, they just thought that she was a bad influence and I made a bad choice in being friends with her. And that, was kind of a shame point too, because it's like, I don't know how to judge people well or something. So it took a while for me to start being able to trust people again and make good friends. I think I'm doing better now, but yeah, it took a while. I was just very frustrated and angry for myself and for all of our peripheral friends that were affected by this, because we didn't sign up for that. We didn't want to have to go through that. So I think about that when I think about victims of a crime. Like, there's so many more people affected than just like the perpetrators and the victim. There's, the families of all involved, even the people who knew the perpetrators. It's like they're in a way victims too, because they had no idea this is going to happen and they got sucked into it anyway. So what I would tell Claire if I were to ever speak to her is that I still care about you. I wish you well. And I never want to see you again. I wanted to share this story because I think that when you go through something like this, you can feel very isolated and feel a lot of sense of shame or guilt about what you could have done. And I think that for other people who've gone through something like that, I get it. Even though you may feel alone, you have other people out there who understand.
Tell me a story, I wanna hear it. You might think it's boring,